Hello everyone, my name is Matt Gage. I'm the Director of the Office of Archaeological Research at the University of Alabama. And today we're going to talk a little bit about archaeology and anthropology. Archaeology is the study of man's material culture, the things he leaves behind. And those often include artifacts, or it may include other things like architecture, fire hearths, those kind of things that give us an idea of where people lived and what they were doing on the landscape. So archaeology is a subfield of anthropology, and anthropology has three other subfields. They include cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, and linguistics. Linguistics is obviously the study of language. Bioanthropology involves the study of the evolution of human beings and the way that their human remains appear after they have become deceased. And then cultural anthropology is the study of cultures all over the world and how they interact. So in total, anthropology is the study of how people live and interact with each other. And all those subfields work together to give us a better understanding of ourselves. So to become an archaeologist often takes a lot of study, a lot of time in the lab, and a lot of experience. And the best way to begin is by reading some books about archaeology and really getting a feel for what's involved. And then you can sign up for a field school, and most universities offer a field school. Here at the University of Alabama, we have field schools that people can take. Usually in the summer times, the museums does the expedition, which is a really fantastic way for folks to learn how to do archaeology the right way. It's very easy to do archaeology the wrong way, and a lot of people go out and just dig up archaeological sites to see what kind of artifacts are there. And that ends up destroying so much of the information that can be gathered from an archaeological site. So instead, we like to teach people how to do it the right way, to make sure that they preserve as much of the information as possible, because that's the really important thing. The artifacts are neat, but they're just part of the story. And archaeology is the story of people and what they do and what they've left behind. So archaeology has been conducted here at Moundville for about 150 years. The first recorded investigations that we know of were in 1869 by Professor Lupton, who was a professor down at Southern University in Greensboro, Alabama. He wanted to see what these mounds were all about. And at the time, there were a lot of questions as to who built the mounds. And archaeology came into vogue and was used by the U.S. government to really determine who was responsible for them, because there were certain people that thought that it wasn't the Native Americans who were responsible for building them, that it was another group, possibly the lost tribe of the Israelites. Even the Mormons claimed that their ancestors had built them. But it was found through archaeology that indeed the Native American populations that still lived here in the southeast were responsible for building the mounds in this region. Over the years, people have used archaeology to try to answer various questions about the mounds. How were they built? What were they used for? Whether or not they were people that lived on them, or whether or not they were just symbols of power. And all of those questions are easily answered through archaeology, but it takes intense investigation, a lot of excavation, and a lot of help, particularly from Native American groups who can provide a lot of information about their ancestry. And archaeologists and Native Americans work together to try to gather information to help to understand the way that these places came to be. These big cities were abandoned, how they became such important archaeological sites. A lot of people think that archaeology is primarily going out in the field and digging up archaeological sites, but in reality, that's just a small part of the project. Typically, about a third of it involves laboratory analysis, and then another third includes the write-up. And all of the information that we gather, all of the artifacts go back to the lab, and we do all kinds of different processes to try to determine what the artifacts are and how they were used. A lot of times we take flotation samples, which allows us to look at the botanical remains from an archaeological site and give us a better understanding of what the people were eating for plants. We'll use faunal analysis to look at the animals that they were eating. We'll use biological anthropology to examine the remains of people to see whether or not they were involved in conflict, whether or not they had diseases, whether or not they were healthy. All of these things come together to give us a better understanding of what the sites were used for and how these people lived. So let's go over some key words about archaeology. So stratigraphy is very important to archaeologists, and stratigraphy refers to the different layers of soil and debris that's left by people. And if you think about it logically, if you drop something on the ground and years go by and leaves fall on it, the leaves fall on top of the object and soil builds up. And then somebody else comes along and maybe they drop something and that lies on top of the leaves. And then some more leaves fall and it continues to build up. Say there's a major flood in a river, it continues to build up. And the law of superposition states that the things on top are the newest and the things towards the bottom are the oldest. And it makes perfect sense, unless you have some type of disconformity, an event that occurs that mixes it all up. And that often includes people going out and digging up things, whether they're going to dig a hole for a house foundation or whether they're going even to bury somebody in the ground. They mix all that material together and it ends up confusing the whole stratigraphy. But those features are also very important for us to understand how the sites were used. And what we look at is the entire site and how it develops through time. And that helps to tell us the story of the people that live there and the site itself. So features are items that are left in the ground by people. And usually they refer to things that are more substantial than just individual artifacts. So features include things like post molds for support posts in a house. They include house floors themselves where people have walked for years and compacted things down. They may include a fire hearth, a storage pit, a trash pit. They include all types of different things. And a lot of times those features are filled with artifacts. And diagnostic artifacts refer to artifacts that we can tell when they came from in time and where they came from. And typically we'll use those diagnostics found within features to give us a better understanding of who lived there, when, and what they were doing. Context and provenience are incredibly important in archaeology. If you go out into a plowed field and you find an arrowhead, you know, that's neat. You can say that you've got an arrowhead. Maybe you can tell roughly how old it is. But if you find that arrowhead in its context, where it's associated with the way it was dropped by the person that left it behind, you can see what it's in association with. Maybe it's related to a house structure. Maybe it's related to a fire hearth. Maybe it's related to the remains of the animal that it was used to harvest. All those things help to paint a bigger picture and explain things a little bit better than just the arrowhead. So we refer to that context as provenience, and the provenience of an artifact is incredibly important to the archaeologist. So relative dating refers to how things relate to one another, which things are older than something else. And we use diagnostic artifacts to give us a relative date. They can get us close to the date that the artifact itself was made, but they can't get us exact. And when we want to get actual dates, it's better for us to use things like carbon dating. And what we'll do is take samples of carbon from typically a feature, a place where somebody had a fire, or they stored some trash or debris or whatever. And we'll take those materials and we'll send them off to a lab for analysis. And they can tell with much more precision the age range of that carbon. So absolute dating is when we actually get dates based on very specific trace elements in materials. A lot of times that can include carbon dating or optically stimulated luminescence dating, where we can go in and look at the dates that these things were manufactured or made much more accurately. And carbon dating in a lot of instances can get us very close to within a range of, say, 25 to 50 years. Now, when you're an archaeologist, it's very difficult to become acquainted with the actual date that a site was occupied. But one way of getting the closest dates that we know how is through dendrochronology. And dendrochronology is the counting of tree rings to tell us exactly not just the year, but the season that the tree was harvested. And it's very difficult to get that information because you have to compare tree rings in a common area to see how far back in time you can push that chronology. So if you have a tree that lived from, say, 1800 to 2020, when it's cut down in 2020, you can see that ring and know what the conditions were like. But if you had a tree that lived from, say, 1700 to 1900, the way those tree rings grow is very common and it overlaps. So we can look at those two, we can compare them, and we can actually extend that chronology back in time. And you just keep building that way until you have a chronology that goes way back in time. Now in the southeast, it's very difficult to get wood preserved because we live in a very humid subtropical environment that ends up causing wood to deteriorate very quickly. But so far, we've been relatively lucky to be able to push the record back roughly 700 years. And we're working every day to try to find more materials to push that back further. And what that does, if we can find samples in archaeological sites, it gives us the opportunity to get our dates very, very precise. And that's exactly what archaeologists need to be able to define an archaeological site's time period of occupation and to be able to explain who was where on the landscape when. Our common heritage is very important to all of us. It tells us who we are, it tells us about our past, and gives us a better indication of how we came to be. And we are the stewards of archaeological sites. It's our responsibility to protect and preserve archaeology so that we can better understand our heritage, so we can understand the way that people lived 1,000, even 10,000 years ago. And we have a responsibility to work together to try to help to protect these things, to ensure that that archaeological record isn't lost and that we don't end up with a situation where we never learn about certain people and certain places because we've allowed things to be destroyed. We don't want that. We want to be able to understand ourselves and the people around us, and to be able to do that, we have to look at our past. And that's why it's very important to preserve and protect archaeological sites. Well, I hope you guys learned a little something today about archaeology and anthropology. And if you have a chance, come down to the park and visit us. We'd love to see you. And this is a fantastic place for you to come and learn more about the subjects that we've been talking about.